Hi everyone. Today we'll be looking another horrible case with you. A single man named Dave Kropa moved to Omaha in 2012 after taking a job managing an auto repair shop. At the time, he was separated from his longtime girlfriend Amy Flora, with whom he had 2 children. It was his first time on his own in a while. I didn't know how to venture back into the dating pool, he said. He signed up for a couple of dating sites. The first person he met through one of them was a woman named Shauna Elizabeth Golyar, who went by Liz. I thought Liz was very pretty. I was attracted to her right away, so then we set up a date, he said. Golyar told him that she was a single mother with 2 kids who were around the same age as his kids. By the 4th date, Kropa said their relationship escalated and they started having sex. But Kropa said he was also upfront with Golyar, telling her that he wanted to continue seeing other women. About 6 months after meeting Golyar, Kropa said an extremely attractive woman walked into the auto shop. It was Cari Farver, a single mom who had brought in her Ford Explorer for maintenance. When we looked at each other, there was a little spark, Kropa said. She's showing me something inside the vehicle and we're standing there, and we're very close, and there was some tension. Kropa asked Farver out and said the 2 immediately hit it off on their first date. So, he invited her back to his apartment after dinner. Kropa said Farver told him she didn't want anything serious. But as she was leaving his apartment at the end of their date, Farver walked right by Golyar in the hallway. Golyar had come by unannounced to pick up some things she said she had left there. It was just a brief encounter, maybe 10 seconds or less, but this encounter would go on to have lasting ramifications for all 3 of them. Kropa was so quickly taken with Farver that when she was tasked with a big project at work, he offered to let her stay with him. Farver worked as a computer programmer and her office was located around the corner from where Kropa lived, whereas she lived nearly an hour away in Macedonia, Iowa. On the morning of November 13, 2012, Kropa said he got ready for work, kissed Farver on the way out, and told her he would see her later that evening. Then, around mid-morning, Kropa said he got a strange text from her saying she wanted to move in together, which was very left field because we had already talked about that not happening, he said. Kropa texted her back saying he wasn't interested. She responded almost immediately, saying, "Fine. I hate you. I'm dating someone else. I don't want to see you anymore. Go away." Lots of profanity, Kropa said. I didn't know what to think. I was blown away. When Kropa returned home that night, Farver was gone. Nearly 2 days passed before he said his phone started blowing up again with texts, in which Farver said, in part, "I hate you. You've ruined my life. You're a terrible person." At the moment, Kropa said he thought, "I don't need this. I dodged a bullet." Cari Farver's mother, son receives strange texts. Farver's mother, Nancy Rainey, says her daughter was diagnosed with depression in her late 20s, a few years after having her son, Max Farver, and that she was eventually diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She had been seeing therapists and was on medication, Rainey said. But by the time Farver was dating Kropa in 2012, Rainey said her daughter was in a good place, working at her dream job in Omaha, and Max was a thriving high school student. Around the time Kropa was receiving those intense text messages, Rainey said she too began receiving strange texts. One message claimed Farver had taken a new job in Kansas, which Rainey said, "totally threw me." She tried to get Farver on the phone, but said her daughter wouldn't call back, which was unusual. When Farver didn't show up on her half-brother's wedding day, Rainey reported her missing. Rainey said she told the police her daughter was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and that she was on medication. The police jumped on that and said, "Well, this kind of thing happens all the time." Rainey said she couldn't get the police to take her pleas seriously. Reporters reached out to the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office for a comment on the initial stages of the investigation. In a statement, they said, "The department takes all missing persons reports seriously no matter the circumstances surrounding them." The available evidence during the initial investigation was inconclusive, but we did not give up, it added. Meanwhile, Kropa said he continued to receive hundreds of harassing text messages and emails from Farver. He said most of the messages focused on Golyar, the woman Kropa had previously dated and who crossed paths with Farver in Kropa's apartment building hallway. Golyar told him she was also receiving harassing texts and emails. One day, Golyar called him, saying her garage had been vandalized. Golyar reported the incident to Omaha police in late November 2012. As the weeks went by, Farver continued to miss more family events, including her own birthday, her son's 15th birthday, and then her father's funeral. Rainey was convinced something was wrong. She said she was still getting texts from Farver and begged her daughter to call her so she could hear her voice, but she never did. She said Max also started getting messages from her, saying she was going to Kansas and coming to get him, but she never showed up. Rainey said the texts became mean and angry. She noticed that oftentimes the texts would be full of grammatical and punctuation errors, as well as spelling mistakes, which she said was out of character for her daughter, who was a stickler for punctuation and spelling. For Kropa, the harassment wasn't just over text and email, he was also being stalked. On one specific occasion, I was sitting in my lazy boy with my feet up, watching TV, trying to relax, and it's nighttime and I get a text saying, "I see you. You're sitting in your chair with your feet propped up, wearing a blue shirt." One night in January 2013, almost 2 months after the harassment began, Kropa was returning home from work when he noticed a familiar vehicle in a nearby parking lot. As he got closer, he realized it was Farver's Ford Explorer. Having worked on the car, he knew it fairly well, so he said he took a photo of the license plate and sent it to Omaha police. When police searched the car, they were able to find only a single fingerprint on a mint container. It didn't match Farver or anyone in the FBI's national database. Meanwhile, weeks turned into months, and Rainey still hadn't found her daughter. One beacon of hope arrived 5 months after Farver disappeared, when Rainey says a man called her to tell her he'd seen Farver at a homeless shelter and that she wanted Rainey to pick her up. She raced over to the shelter and that investigators met her there. But when they arrived, they learned Farver had never been there. "It was such a letdown and I was just devastated," Rainey said. "I get this raising in my hopes and then it's dashed again. I knew somebody was playing games here." 6 months into Farver's disappearance, Max decided to message his mother's Facebook account to see what would happen. She messaged back. It said, "Hey little man, how are you?" He asked her to answer 3 questions to prove that it was really her. What his middle name was, what the name of their first dog was, and what his best friend's name was, and she never responded to that message. All the while, Kropa and Golyar, who were still seeing each other on and off, were still receiving hostile, nasty text messages. It was actually extremely common for us to be hanging out on a couch, watching TV or something, and both of our phones would start blowing up with text messages and emails from Cari, Kropa said. Kropa said he got an email from Farver threatening to kill Golyar and that it included a photo of a woman tied up in the trunk of a car. Kropa called Golyar, who confirmed she was fine. Then, in August 2013, Golyar's house caught fire, killing her family pets, including 2 dogs, a cat, and a snake. Fire investigators believed it was arson, and Golyar told police she suspected Farver was the culprit. Kropa's ex-girlfriend, Amy Flora, the mother of his 2 children, had also received threatening messages from Farver. By spring 2015, it had been 2.5 years since anyone had seen Farver, yet the harassment continued. Detectives Ryan Avis and Jen Doty of the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office in Council Bluffs, Iowa, had never worked on the case, but they had heard about it in the office. They were so intrigued by Farver's mysterious disappearance that they volunteered to take it on. So they started from the beginning, digging through the original case file. Avis thought it was alarming that there hadn't been any activity in her checking account the entire time she had been gone. She had good income, a good house. I had come to the conclusion that I could not prove she was actually alive. Doty said the glaring detail that stuck out for him was Golyar, who he said had never been involved in Farver's life until she went missing. "All of a sudden she's this focus of harassment," he said. "Her name was all over all the reports. So to me, there was something with Liz. She definitely was a person of interest." The only forms of communication anyone had received from Farver were electronic. So Doty and Avis asked their colleague Anthony Kava, a digital forensics administrator at the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office, for help. Both Kropa and Golyar had agreed to have the content of their phones downloaded in 2013 for the initial group of investigators. This content was included in the original case file, and Kava started connecting the dots. Cari, or the imposter who was pretending to be Cari, sent Dave about 15,000 email messages over a 3-year span. It might have been upwards of 25,000 or 50,000 texts in all. The investigators found a photo of Farver's Ford Explorer in Golyar's phone dump, which included metadata that showed the photo had been taken about a month before police recovered the vehicle. Another thing we found on the phone download was there were 6 calls that were made to Cari's residence. This didn't make sense to us because she said she'd only met Cari one time passing through a hallway. The investigators also found the photo of a woman who had been tied up, which had been emailed to Kropa, and determined it had been taken by Golyar's phone. They also discovered a video recording that showed someone walking outside of Kropa's apartment. It had been uploaded to YouTube under Farver's name, but was tied to an IP address registered to Golyar's house. In May 2015, Doty and Avis went to interview Nancy Rainey, during which they said they believed her claims that her daughter was missing and that something had happened to her. During their meeting, Rainey provided investigators with another clue. She told them that after Farver disappeared in 2012, she received a text saying Farver had sold all her furniture and asked Rainey to let the buyer into the house to pick it all up. As supposed proof of the sale, Rainey received a photo of a check for that furniture that was made out to Farver and signed by Shauna Golyar. "We knew Liz Golyar's real name was Shauna," Doty said. It was yet another connection between the two women who supposedly were strangers. The investigators also matched the mysterious fingerprint found in Farver's car to Golyar. As their investigation was underway, Kropa realized the pistol he had purchased for protection was missing. He reported it stolen to police. On December 4, 2015, Doty and Avis were at the Pottawatomie County Sheriff's Office when Golyar walked in. Stunned to see her, they learned she was there to file a harassment complaint against Kropa's ex-girlfriend, Amy Flora. After Golyar left, Avis drove over to her house to interview her, pretending it was about her complaint. She told Avis she now thought it was Flora who had been sending her threatening messages this whole time, not Farver. The investigator asked if he could download the contents of her phone so they could review the messages. Golyar signed the consent form and turned it over. Getting access to the information on Golyar's phone was an important moment in the investigation. During their conversation, Avis said Golyar mentioned she knew Kropa's gun, which she correctly identified as a 9mm Smith & Wesson, was missing and thought Flora had stolen it. In a bizarre twist, Golyar called 911 the following day, claiming she had been shot in the leg while walking alone at night in Big Lake Park in Council Bluffs. Investigators said Golyar at first claimed she didn't know who the culprit was, and then she later said she thought it was Flora. It was pretty quickly determined that most likely Liz Golyar had shot herself. Police said that Flora was cleared that same evening. Meanwhile, Kava got to work sifting through the contents of Golyar's cell phone after the second download. He discovered Golyar had registered upwards of 20 or 30 fake email addresses, all of which had some variation of Farver's name. Kava also discovered that Golyar was using an app which allowed her to schedule future messages. This explained how she could be with Kropa and both of their phones would get bombarded with messages. She was able to send messages pretending to be Cari, and they would arrive while she was sitting on the couch next to Dave, Kava added. Kava estimated that Golyar must have spent about 40 to 50 hours a week impersonating Farver. Doty and Avis brought Golyar in for an interview 2 weeks after she was shot. At the time, they said Golyar kept pushing them to investigate Flora and had no idea she herself was their main suspect in Farver's disappearance. Doty and Avis came up with a plan. They were going to tell Golyar they believed her story that Flora had shot her, and they wanted Golyar's help to get Flora to incriminate herself. They asked Golyar to reach out to Flora and see if she would tell her anything about what happened to Cari Farver. Of course, the detectives knew Flora had nothing to do with Farver's disappearance or the threatening messages that had been sent for years. Their plan worked. They said Golyar almost immediately fabricated emails she said were from Flora. We started receiving messages that she said were from Amy, Flora, where Amy confesses to shooting Liz at Big Lake Park, Doty said. He and Avis continued to press Golyar to ask Flora, who they knew to be Golyar, for details about Farver's death. A few days later, Golyar did exactly that. They said she forwarded an email to them that had supposedly come from Flora, saying she had stabbed Farver 3 to 4 times and stuffed her body into a garbage bag. The details were bone-chilling because they were graphic, Doty said. Within hours, they said more confession emails from Flora appeared. The emails included that Farver had been stabbed to death in her own car. What we wanted to do was go back and look at that vehicle to determine if that crime happened there. This was the 3rd time police had searched Farver's car, but this time, Doty says they pulled the fabric off the passenger seat. Once uncovered, they found a red stain that was determined to be Farver's blood. Liz Golyar is arrested for the murder of Cari Farver. Because the murder most likely took place in Omaha, the Omaha Police Department had to be involved, and cold case homicide detective Dave Schneider joined the investigation. Detective Schneider brought Golyar in for questioning and confronted her with the evidence Doty, Avis, and Kava had gathered so far, the photos on her cell phone, the IP addresses traced back to her house, and the confession emails from Flora. Golyar denied knowing anything and claimed she didn't have internet service. But while she was being interrogated, Doty and Avis had gotten a search warrant for her apartment. Inside, they found some of Farver's possessions, including a digital camera and a camcorder, which they believed Golyar had stolen from Farver's home. On the camcorder, they found video of Farver talking about how someone had vandalized her car. It was time-stamped 2 days before she disappeared. On December 22, 2016, Golyar was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. This was by far the most difficult case I've ever tried. Most homicides are dark. This one was bizarre to the point where it would take some convincing to make somebody believe that it actually happened, she said. There's no way that someone would let their dog die in a fire that they started. There's no way that someone would shoot themselves in the femur. Golyar remains at the Nebraska Correctional Center for Women. To this day, she maintains her innocence and claims Farver's real killer is still out there. I want Liz to go away and never do this to anybody again, Kropa said. Nancy and Cari's son were foremost in my mind. They're, unfortunately, the ones that have to live with the repercussions. Kropa added that the investigators who solved the case, Doty, Avis, Kava, they're all heroes. Those guys, they mean the world to me. I can't thank them enough. They're my boys, Nancy Rainey said. The 3 investigators established a scholarship fund in Farver's name at the local community college she had attended in hopes of associating something positive with her memory, Kava said. When asked how she wanted her daughter to be remembered, Rainey said, as the fun-loving, talented, smart woman that she was. Cari was only 37 when she died, Rainey said. If I could talk to Cari right now, I'd say, I love you. I'm so glad that you're in my life. You have a beautiful son who's got a wonderful life coming, and I miss you terribly.